Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the absolute most fascinating historical puzzles of the medieval world, the profound shifts in Spain's religious identity. We're talking about a region that has basically been ground zero for empire building, massive ideological clashes, and dramatic conquests. The story of Al-Andalus is this incredible tale of transformation, where the religious and cultural foundations of a whole population were completely rewritten, and not just once, but multiple times. So let's map out exactly how these historical tectonic plates shifted over the centuries to figure out exactly why Al-Andalus changed its religious faith so deeply.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you look at Spain today, you see a country where almost the entire population practices Christianity, right? It's a huge cornerstone of their modern cultural identity. But if you rewind the clock just a few centuries, the exact same population in this region followed Islam. This is a stunning historical paradox. How does an entire region undergo such a complete, top-to-bottom religious and cultural metamorphosis? What were the specific catalysts that made the whole population eventually convert? Well, to really grasp why this region changed face so dramatically, we need to understand the epic scale of the history we're dealing with here. 700. Spain and Portugal were not just briefly occupied, they were firmly under Islamic rule for 700 years. I mean, this wasn't just a fleeting blip in history. It was an era that spanned dozens of generations. We're looking at a monumental pendulum of power that swung deeply in one direction, established a rich, rooted culture before inevitably swinging back. But to truly understand this immense 700-year period, we actually need to look a lot further back in time, way before the first Islamic expansion, to see what laid the groundwork for this region's complex identity. Which brings us to our first era, the Roman roots of Idesab, spanning from 117 AD to 476 AD. So, to comprehend the religious shifts in Spain, we have to start with the Romans. They spent about 400 years aggressively spreading Christianity across their territories, which planted the very first deep religious roots in the region. But as any historian knows, the larger an empire grows, the heavier it gets, right? Maintaining that sprawling, continent-spanning Roman Empire proved to be wildly expensive and just logistically impossible for the rulers. They basically had to make a desperate administrative call to keep the whole thing from collapsing, so they deliberately divided the empire in two. On one side, you have the Trinidad Empire, ruled by Justinian I, and on the other, we have Ibis, ruled by Caesar Augustus. This division was a desperate attempt to maintain control, but those political fractures in the Roman foundation were already starting to show. Fast forward along our timeline to the year 476 AD, and the Roman Sultanate completely disintegrates. Germanic tribes, who were spreading rapidly throughout Europe at the time, saw their golden opportunity and just swept right into the region referred to as Arib. The unified Roman control totally shattered, and the kingdoms on the Jazira Numa Arib began changing hands rapidly. The region was fractured, it was politically unstable, and honestly, it was perfectly ripe for a completely new influence to emerge from beyond its borders. Next up, let's look at the rapid expansion, from 571 AD to 661 AD. While Abe was dealing with all this political chaos, our focus shifts dramatically over to the Middle East. In 571 AD, Prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca, catalyzing what would quickly become one of the most explosive religious movements in human history. The momentum of this movement was just unprecedented. After the passing of Prophet Muhammad in 632 AD, Islam's reach expanded outward incredibly fast, stretching from East Africa all the way to Anatolia under the Caliphates. But then, a monumental transition of power happens following Hazrat Ali's martyrdom in 661 AD, which marks the beginning of the Banu Umayyad rule. The really crucial takeaway here is how these new Banu Umayyad rulers fundamentally changed the trajectory of the Islamic Sultanate. Since they lived in Syria, they decided to shift the primary seat of Islam from Mecca to Damascus. From this new capital, they launched an aggressively successful campaign of expansion. They were methodically spreading Islam state by state, first winning over local populations and then officially expanding their borders. Under their rule, the empire hit its absolute peak. Just imagine a single power with boundaries stretching all the way from West Africa to Sind. It was a breathtaking expanse of control. Yet there was one major area they hadn't quite set their sights on yet, the Jazira Numaya Ibi. And that perfectly sets up our next chapter, the collision at Jazira Numa Ibi. This massive global expansion brings us right back to the Bar Sagir region. At the time, it was ruled by the Visco tribe under King Roderick. But honestly,
Roderick's kingdom was kind of rotting from the inside. His subjects were profoundly unhappy, leaving the state under internal siege and incredibly vulnerable. It just needed a tiny spark to ignite a total collapse. And as our source material reveals, that spark wasn't just some dry political dispute, it was deeply, violently personal. King Roderick had abducted the daughter of one of the noblemen in his own kingdom, a guy named Count Julian. This single act of tyranny set the fate of the entire region in motion. To exact his revenge, Count Julian looked across the water and sought the help of Musa ibn Nusrat, the African governor of the Banu Umayyah in 711 AD. Now, Musa himself had already been harboring ambitions to conquer the region, so Julian's plea for revenge wasn't just a request for help, it was literally a golden opportunity handed over on a silver platter. What happens next is a classic David versus Goliath scenario. At Count Julian's urging, Musa sent his general, Tariq ibn Ziyad, across the strait, culminating in the historic Battle of Galet. King Roderick fielded this overwhelming army of 25,000 soldiers. General Tariq ibn Ziyad, he brought just 7,000. Yet, despite being heavily outnumbered, Tariq's forces utterly crushed the Visigoth army, and Roderick himself was killed on the battlefield. With Roderick out of the picture and his vast army shattered, the door was blown wide open. The Banu Umayyah arrived in full force and gradually, methodically, took complete control of the entire Bar Sagir region. Islam firmly established itself in the territory. And to really signify this total transition of power, culture, and religion, the Banu Umayyah officially renamed the Jazira Numa Abian region to Andalus. A brand new chapter had officially begun, cementing that 700-year legacy we talked about at the start. Moving right along to our next phase, defeat and the birth of a dynasty. So, as you know, history is rarely a straight line of victories. Flush with their success in Andalusia, the Banu Umayyah attempted to conquer France in 732 AD, but they suffered a truly crushing defeat at the Battle of Tours. Sensing this moment of profound vulnerability, a rival faction, the ruthless Banu Abbasi, began their rise. Their goal? To systematically wipe out the Banu Umayyah bloodline completely. But this brings us to a really thrilling mini-narrative from our source material. Against all odds, one single ruler managed to survive the purge, Abdul Rahman. To save his own life, he enacted this daring escape from his capital in Damascus, fleeing all the way to the newly conquered territory of Andalusia. Because the Banu Abbasi had taken over essentially all the other regions, Andalusia became his absolute last refuge. And it was there that Abdul Rahman successfully established a brand new, completely independent rule, declaring the city of Córdoba as his new capital. Now, you might assume a surviving refugee ruler would run a paranoid, defensive state, right? But Abdul Rahman did the exact opposite. Under his rule, Andalus experienced a breathtaking surge of progress. He completely transformed the infrastructure. We're talking expansive road networks, incredible buildings like the Great Mosque of Córdoba, and towering aqueducts like the Niraj Malaga to secure vital resources. But listen to this. His most strategic move wasn't physical, it was political. Recognizing that his was the very last power center of the dynasty, he knew he desperately needed his subjects' unwavering loyalty. So he granted religious freedom to his people. It was a brilliant policy that kept the populace incredibly happy, allowing Córdoba to emerge as a fiercely powerful and prosperous kingdom. In this case, stability is what anchored the faith of the region. Which ushers us into our next section, a fragile golden age. For a long time, the kingdom flourished. Abdul Rahman's descendants cultivated a true golden age in Andalus Kila. But you have to remember, this prosperity relied heavily on strong, capable, and mature administration from his heirs. And as the turning of the centuries approached, a staggering historical disruption was looming on the horizon. In 976 AD, the kingdom was hit with an abrupt and severe crisis. Abdul Rahman's great-grandson Al-Hakim passed away. The immense, crushing weight of administering this complex, politically delicate region fell entirely onto the shoulders of his son, Hisham. The problem? Hisham was literally 10 years old. An administrative apparatus that required deep political acumen, sharp military strategy, and the really careful balancing of religious freedoms was suddenly legally commanded by a child. As our source explicitly notes, Hisham's incredibly young age naturally made it profoundly difficult to administer the kingdom effectively, and all but 100% agreement that administrative strength and stability would be absolutely essential to make the reign of Hisham possible. And that brings us to the final, thought-provoking question of this explainer. Think about the massive, sweeping history we've just covered, the early Roman foundations, the rapid Islamic expansion, a regional conquest born out of a personal revenge plot, the survival of a sole heir, and a thriving golden age built on strategic stability.
Can a 10-year-old king possibly maintain the delicate balance required to uphold a 700-year religious dynasty? Or was this childhood succession the exact political crack that allowed the pendulum of power to swing violently back, eventually rewriting the region's religious faith all over again? It's a fascinating historical paradox to ponder. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.